In today's tutorial, we are diving deep into the world of interactive data visualization using R and the powerful reactable package. Specifically, we'll be exploring how to create dynamic tables with drop-down filters like this, which allow you to interactively explore and analyze your data. So buckle up and let's get started. In my Quarto file, I have already included a code chunk that loads the tidyverse and the reactable package. Also, I have created a shorter dataset of the Parma Penguins dataset, which will give us access to a short dataset like this, which we can use in a table. And the way to turn this into an interactive table is pretty simple. All we have to do is to pass this to reactable. This will immediately give us an interactive table where the columns can be sorted by alphabet or numerically by clicking on the column names. Now, to make this table a little bit nicer, let us format the columns where we make sure that all of these things here are either spelled with a capital letter or, in the case of the body mass, with something which is more English and less a column from some data set. So what we do is we target the columns argument, and in there we pass in a list, and then we go through all of the columns from our data sets one by one, and we start out with the species, and there we use the callDef function to set the name to species, and then we do the same thing with island and body mass as well, and then we have nicer labels in the columns of our table. And now making this table filterable is also pretty easy with the reactable package. All we have to do is to set the filterable argument to true, and then we immediately get a search bar for each column. So now I could put in something like Gen2 here, and it would filter for only the species Gen2. So that's pretty neat, but not exactly what we're going for. We want to have a drop-down menu for the species and the islands here. Thankfully, we can customize all of this using the callDef function. And if we open up the documentation of this function, we can see that there is a filter input argument. And if we scroll all the way down, then we see that this is a custom filter input, and it needs to be an R function that takes the column values and column names as arguments. So this means that here we need to create a function that creates the drop-down menus for us. So let's first worry about the drop-down menus. Let's create a new code chunk, and then let us figure out how to create a drop-down menu first, and then we worry about the interactive stuff. And the way this works in R is to use the HTML tools package, because this gives you tons of functions to create HTML input elements like drop-down menus. And once you have this package loaded, you can use the select function from the tags list. So this part here is one function, and if you execute this, you will see that you get a select input that you would see in HTML. It's a bit hard to see what this does here if you only see the code. So one way you could avoid that is to just render this Quarto document, and then you will see here that the output of this is an empty drop-down menu. Right now, we cannot do anything with this. Now, what we can do with this select input is to give a couple of options for the drop-down menu to fill it. What we need for that is the option function, and in there we can specify the label that is displayed in the drop-down menu and the value that is behind this label. And if we re-render this, we can see now that we have a drop-down menu that has one thing in it. So let's fill the select function with more inputs. Let's put in the Adderley, the chin strap, and the Gen2 label in there as well. And the values for this will be the same thing. And now if we execute this, then we see that now our drop-down menu is filled with all the options that we have. But now that we have seen this in action, we might realize that this part here is pretty tailored to the species column. But we also need to do the same thing for the island column, so we need to modify this code here so that it is more general. So instead of having this part here, let us remove this and put in a map call from the per package. By this, I mean that we iterate over all the species that are inside of the dataset, and for each of those times we apply this option function. And now if we re-render this, then we can see that we get the exact same output, so that is nice. But this is still tailored to the species, but now we can wrap all of this into a function, and then we replace this part here with the things that correspond to the values of a column. And this reminds me, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button. This helps me a lot, so thank you for that. And now let's get back to the video. So let's take this part here, create a function. Let's call it filter function. And as per the instruction from the documentation of callDef, we need to make sure that this depends on the names and the values. Actually, it needs to be the other way around. It needs to be the values and the names. And then we can stick this part in here. And once we have that, we take our values argument and replace the hard-coded species with that. And now we can use our function and put in some names argument in there, which doesn't do anything yet, but still we need it because our function depends on a second argument. But the point here is that if we re-render this, we should see that we get the exact same output. We have the exact same drop-down menu, which is nice. Alright, now comes the hard part. Now we need to make sure that something actually happens when we modify the drop-down menu here. Right now nothing is happening because we haven't defined anything to happen yet. And the way that works is to, inside of our select function, we have to set the onChange argument. So let's put in the onChange thing there, and in there we can put in some JavaScript code that is executed on change of the select drop-down menu. For starters, we can put in something like an alert call. This is actually a JavaScript function that throws some pop-up message with a message that we have to specify. Here, let's just put in something like hooray and see what's happening then. So again, basic JavaScript here. And if we re-render this now, we should see something happening if we execute this. And yeah, we see there is a hooray call coming up. So this means our drop-down menu actually works. We could also make this data dependent on our names here. So let's put in a bit more text inside of the alert function that says something like the name column changed, and this curly syntax refers to the glue function. So let's put in this part in here, but this requires that we actually have the same argument here. So let's call this name and not names. And now if we render all of this, then our message should be different. Yep, it now says the species column changed. We could put in something like island in here. And re-rendering this, make sure that in our message we get now the island column changed, hooray. So that works nicely. Now we have to figure out what the JavaScript code is that actually does what we want and doesn't throw some weird message. Really what we want is that the table changes and not some message is popping up. And the way to figure out what kind of JavaScript we need is to look into the insanely good documentation of the reactable package. Because on this website you will find among the articles something like custom filtering, and then in the examples you can find a whole lot of stuff. And then if you're looking for the data list filter, which is kind of what we do here, you see that the onInput argument is compiled using the sprintf function, which is not exactly the same thing as glue, but the point of this function is to put out some text, and this is really what we have to look at to figure out what kind of thing we need to change or what JavaScript code we need to do what we want to do. And here we can see that the JavaScript function that powers all of this is the reactable.setFilter function. And once we have that, we just have to realize that this function needs 3 arguments, just like we have here. And if we look at the end of the line, we can actually see that the first argument is the table ID, the second argument is the name of the column, and then something about the values that are inside of the column that we are targeting. This is actually what this part refers to. So back in RStudio, we have to replace this part here with the new JavaScript code that we've just learned. So let's remove everything and then put in a glue function again to throw in the new code that we need. And we learned that we need the reactable.setFilter function. And the first argument of that is an table ID. For now, let's just call this myTable. We will set the ID of the table in a second so that this actually works. And then we need to specify the column that we want to target. So this means we need to set in the name that we have as argument for the function that we call. And then we have to use this event.target.value to mean the values of the column. And with that, we have everything that we need. We can re-render this and we can see that we still get a drop-down menu. Nothing is happening yet because we haven't defined an ID for this table here. So let's put in an element ID here and set this to my table, just like we have specified. And now if we execute this, then we will see, let me make this larger, that if I put in something like Adderley, we don't get any rows found because Adderley is put into the island column and not into the species column. So let's modify this here. We have to actually target the species. The reason why this is happening is because in the first argument, we have to use this values from the species column, but then put in a different name. So that is why this was happening. Now, if we do it right, then we see that the filter actually works. And the cool thing is that our drop-down menu doesn't actually have to be inside of the table. Instead, it can just be anywhere on the website and it still works. But still, it's probably a good idea to get the drop-down menu into the columns of this table. So that is why we modify the call def function calls here. And in there, we just have to specify the filter input and set this to our filter function. And we do the exact same thing in the island column. And in order for this to work, we have to make sure that the code for the filter function comes actually before the table is created. Otherwise, when we render this document, we'll get an error. So let's just put in this part in here. And now if we execute this, we get a document that has our drop-down menus inside of the tables. And now if we filter this, this works quite nicely. This one doesn't have any data. Let's go with Adelie and Bisco or Dream. Let's go with all islands and all penguins. So everything works as expected, which is nice. And the funny thing is that the second drop-down menu that I have left in here by accident, it is actually still working. We can put this in there. And if we put in something else in here, the last selection will always override the previous selection. So that's maybe a bit funny in a sense. I don't know, really it isn't that funny, but anyway, it is in there. Let's just take it out because we don't need that part anymore. Let's just worry about our drop-down menu not really looking nice. We might want to have a nicer drop-down menu that fills this whole cell here. So let us modify the style of these drop-down menus, and the way to do that is to modify the style of the select function in here. So we can use style here to add inline CSS style, and in there we say that the width should be 100% and the height should be 28 pixels. And now if we execute all of this, then our drop-down menu looks a little bit nicer. Nice, with that you know how to create an interactive table that doesn't need anything like a shiny server or anything like that. And all of this was powered from within R, so that's pretty cool. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Thank you for watching and I will see you next time.